الشعب اللي تمشى بالحفاظ عالشوك عجلي وعلى النار.
بن بولعيد واسمو مصطفى، علي لطوانت وبدي عمر. القصبة ما زالها واقفة وما زالوا عساس الدار، ما زالها سعلة السقيفة وما زالها حرمة الجار. أنا يا بلادي راني عارف هما ما كانوش عارفين،
دهشوا نهار علي ما توقف، احنا عادتنا نموت واقفين. نموت على النيف والشرف، نموت على الوطن والدين، علمنا بلا ريح يرفرف، احنا هما الجزائريين. أنا يا بلادي على بالي هما ما كانوش فاهمين،
حبوا يديو البلاد ديالي، حسبونا ماناش قادرين. فكتهم حسيبة بنبوعلي الجميلة تونسى الأخرين، من حقك يا الجزائر تولولي ولدتي نساو رجال حرين. أنا يا بلادي سمحيلي ما قدرتش نذكرهم كاملين،
واش نذكر واش نخلي شهداء رواحهم طاهرين، مازالهم في قلبي وفي بالي، ربي يرحمهم أجمعين. والقصبة مازالها ديالي وسط الدار والعرس واقفين.
معليش يا القصبة وريلهم
قرصان رياس وساطيل، على عروج وخير الدين احكي لهم،
وفهم الناس اللي جاهلين
باللي الجزائر ماهيش ليهم، ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس. كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين،
باللي الجزائر ماشي ديالهم، ولادها مازالهم عايشين في وسط الناس. كيفاش تعرفهم في الشدة ديما متحدين.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Jazair Hope platform. Today, I am really delighted to have our two distinguished guests that have honored my invitation for the second time, Mr. Ilan Pape joining us from London, and Mr. Vijay Prashad joining us from Santiago, Chile. Before we start, let me briefly introduce our guests. So Mr. Ilan Pape, an expatriate Israeli historian, social activist, and professor at Exeter University. Mr. Pape is renowned for his extensive work on the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and his advocacy for a peaceful resolution. Mr. Vijay Prashad, an Indian historian, a journalist. Mr. Prashad is executive director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He is highly respected for his insightful analysis of the global social and political issue. Mr. Ilan and Mr. Prashad, thank you very much for joining us today. I look forward for stimulating and enlightening discussion. Mr. Ilan, if you would like to say an introductory word, please.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
If you would like to say something to our
Oh, yes.
followers, go ahead.
Masa al-Khair wa salam alaikum. It's a great pleasure to be once more in Jazair Hope. Thank you so much for inviting. Would you like me to start the discussion, or would you like just to say hello, and then come back to the issue?
Yeah. Let's ask Mr. Vijay Prasad to say a couple of words, and then we go ahead.
Well, all I will say is hope never dies. I think that slogan that you have at the end of what was that? Was that Rashid Taha? Sounds like Rashid Taha to me, but probably somebody else. Hope never
No,
dies.
Yeah, it is somebody else. Yeah, his name is Yassin Ouabed. So yeah, and the slogan of the platform is Jazair hopes never sleeps. Yes,
Because I mean, the fact of the matter is, despite us living in really a horrible situation in the world, the fact that we are human beings in many ways gives us optimism that we creatively will try our best to overcome any obstacle. Humans are creative people. That gives us hope. And it gives me great joy to be in company of people who hope and not people who hate. We are hopers, not haters.
Absolutely.
thank you very much, Mr. Prasad. This goes directly to my heart, and certainly to the people who are following us also. So our discussion today, as we announced, we will focus on the future scenarios of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We will explore 4 scenarios, analyzing their likelihood and potential consequences. So the 4 scenarios are a two-state solution scenario, a scenario where we will see Israel completely disappearing, a scenario where we will see Israel annexing a complete lands of Palestine, and the 4th scenario of this escalating to a global war. I think that these 4 scenarios are pretty much exhaustive, and I will be anyway very happy to listen from you if there is a 5th or 6th other scenario. So with that, Ilan, and before we start, just a reminder that I have shared with our audience a small poll that I will show now in the screen. So asking them basically what they think about the likelihood of each scenario. So I reiterate, I ask to those who have not yet voted to vote, and at the end of the discussion, we will explore their views. Of course, the audience will be a little bit biased toward or skewed towards positively toward Palestine, but let's see. So, Ilan, with that, please go ahead and tell us what you think about the first scenario.
Yes. So let's talk about the first scenario, the two-state solution, which I think has been dead for a very long time now. I always say that the two-state solution is like a corpse lying in a morgue, but we were not invited to the funeral as yet because so many people's political and economic interests are vested in this solution that they don't want to admit its total failure and irrelevance to the reality on the ground. Let me expand just a little bit why do I think so. There are 2 dimensions by which one can analyze the irrelevance of the two-state solution. One is moral, ideological, if you want, and the other one is practical. Morally and ideologically, the two-state solution is actually a colonialist idea, by which the settler colonial movement that colonizes a country coming from Europe, colonizes a country in West Asia or in the Arab world, and is either willing genuinely or cynically to allow some of the land to be ruled by the indigenous people, not with full sovereignty, not as masters of the land, but as someone who might have an autonomous position within a small portion of the land that they have colonized. We have a very good example from South Africa during the time of apartheid, when white South Africa offered the Bantustans, small kingdoms, where it didn't want to rule directly, only indirectly, and hoped that this would tame the resistance to the apartheid system. Similarly, when people talk about the two-state solution, they think the Palestinians would be content with a small share of their historical homeland, where they would have limited sovereignty and would be at the mercy of Israeli rule whenever Israel would decide that they are not fulfilling their part of the deal of the two-state solution. So I think that offering a solution for a small portion of historical Palestine that relates to only part of the Palestinians can never deal properly with the outstanding issues that are at the heart of the Palestine question. It's not surprisingly that the best deal ever offered under the two-state solution, the Oslo Accord, has in 1993 has totally excluded the millions of Palestinian refugees from any future solution and the 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel. It only related to the Palestinians living in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And even there, the Oslo Accord offered only partial control of Palestinians over parts of the West Bank with no real connection with the Gaza Strip. There was supposed to be, I'm sorry, another autonomous enclave. So this is, for me, not decolonization. This is not a comprehensive solution. And more important than anything else, it doesn't have the most important element that a solution should have, which is equality. This is a solution that runs contradictorily to the principle of equality. And without the principle of equality, there's very little hope for any reconciliation and liberation in Palestine. Practically speaking, it is also impossible because in the West Bank currently we have 700,000 Jewish settlers, and they have a very high natural growth, so the number keeps changing, and they are representing a very important section of the Israeli Jewish electorate or society, whereas in the past they might have been more marginal and not the central political force in Israel. This is not the situation anymore, as we have seen from the results of the November 22 elections in Israel. So the ideology that sees the West Bank as part of the land of Israel and that supports further colonization and Judaization of the West Bank, that supports the settlers in the West Bank, not only support them financially, but also allowing them to assault and harass the local Palestinian population in order to encourage it to leave the West Bank. And now they are behind the plans for continued genocide in Gaza. This practically means that whoever talks about a two-state solution does not realize where is the Israeli mentality today, where does its political system sees itself in the future, and therefore I think it's wrong to talk about it. May I say, and with this I would end, I understand why some people in the West Bank living under the occupation, direct or indirect Israeli occupation, hope that the two-state solution will bring an end to the military occupation. I can understand, I can sympathize with this idea, but I think Oslo should have proven to them that the two-state solution does not end the occupation. It just substitutes one form of occupation with another. And therefore, I think that this is an illusion to think that even an international support for the idea of a two-state solution would bring an end to the oppression, colonization, and suppression of the Palestinians. It would just, in fact, perpetuate it and gives the false impression that there are really genuine talks for peace, and therefore Israel should not be sanctioned or pressured as long as it talks about a possible two-state solution. So I think I'll end here with this reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan. Same question to you, Prasad. Please go ahead.
Well, it's no surprise that Professor Pape and I agree on most of our positions on this. But let me come at it from a slightly different angle. First, I've traveled to the West Bank, to Jerusalem, to Israel, to Gaza, and so on. And I must say, coming from India, spending a lot of time traveling around different countries in the world, on the African continent, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so on, I must say we're talking about such a small part of the planet Earth. The West Bank. When I first went there, I thought, my God, this was where all the biblical and Quranic stories were conjured up, and I imagined vast terrain between the hills and the Jordan River, and I imagined an enormous Jordan River. Jordan River, okay, it's dammed upriver, but it's like a stream, and the hills are small, and the land is quite barren in large parts of it. It's extraordinary how much focus there is on such a small part of the world. Jerusalem is a beautiful city, but Jerusalem is a city of great complexity. It's not a city of this or that people. It's a city of its own history. Jerusalem is beyond its people. It is a historical city. It doesn't matter whether you are Armenian or Jewish or Muslim or Christian or whatever. It is a city of intertwined complexity. It's impossible to imagine this very small region divided. India, which is a vast territory, was divided in a brutal partition. 1 million people died, 13 million people had to cross to build Pakistan and India. My family had to move, and so on. It was a very difficult period. 1 million people died in the partition of India. It's not a joke. But to partition such a small territory has an element of impracticality to it. So even when they said, well, a two-state solution, what two-state solution? I mean, how was it ever possible? Even in the Oslo dialogue, there was an understanding that there would be the right to free passage between the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza. From day one, the Israeli government violated that agreement. They never allowed free passage. Forget from West Bank to Gaza. There is no free passage from the West Bank to East Jerusalem. You have to go through checkpoints and humiliations and so on. The idea of a two-state solution itself is impractical from the beginning. Forget the politics. Forget the settlers. Forget all that. It's impractical. However, today, it is very important that the Chinese government and the Indian government have come out publicly and said a two-state solution must be honored. And the reason it's important is not because we favor a two-state solution, because they are trying to prevent the annexation of Gaza and the annexation of the West Bank. You see, it's very interesting. You'd assume that the Indian government, which has a connection with Mr. Netanyahu, direct Modi and Netanyahu connection, you'd assume that the Indian government would have come out and said, we stand with Israel. But no, the Indian government condemned the war and said two-state solution. But we should not confuse what India and China are saying today with the actual two-state solution. They are using the language of a two-state solution to prevent the immediate annexation of Gaza and the West Bank, so that the so-called facts on the ground are not altered so dramatically that to then talk about a unified Israel-Palestine becomes impossible. So I think it's important to distinguish between, on the one side, the fact of a two-state solution, which I agree is basically, it's a mythical concept, with the politics today of defending lands that the Palestinians are holding, however tenuously, and preventing a so-called second Nakba. The two-state solution idea coming from these major governments is a shield. It's actually not a proposal for the future of
Okay.
Palestine, because even they understand that's not possible.
Very clear, Mr. Prasad, and you give me the chance to move to the next scenario, which speaks about the possible annexation of complete Palestine lands by the Israeli state or entity. So again, this question, we start with Mr. Ilan Pape to tell us what he thinks about the likelihood of such a scenario.
Yes. Well, first of all, Israel is already controlling the whole of historical Palestine, not directly everywhere and not according to law, but in practice. So annexation can take various forms. There is a de facto annexation, which already is there, and there is a de jure annexation, the one that is declared by law. This has not as yet happened. The possibility of this happening is there, undoubtedly, given the direction Israeli politics is going. The Israeli society and politics have shifted to what we call in Israel the right. Right means in Israel less a debate about capitalism and socialism. It's much more, when we say the right, it's about the nationalist, Zionist, annexationist position with regard to the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So this idea, which was one more marginal, is now mainstream in Israeli politics, and therefore it's possible that the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, would pass eventually laws that may annex, maybe not directly and immediately, the whole of the West Bank, but there is a program, or a plan rather, to annex Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank, which, according to the Oslo Accord, is controlled by Israel within the West Bank. As your listeners and viewers may remember, Oslo divided the West Bank to areas A, B, and C. A is under the control of the Palestinian Authority, B is under joint Israeli-Palestinian control, and Area C, 60% of the West Bank, is under Israeli control. And so I think the first step would be to annex Area C. It depends how the war in Gaza would evolve in the future, but definitely the right-wing coalition that is now in power wants to annex not only the West Bank fully, but also the Gaza Strip. And we have to understand that annexation includes ethnic cleansing and depopulation in their mind. They have no moral inhibitions in doing that, and see it as a legitimate act to secure, in their eyes, the state of Israel. So I would take very seriously this scenario. But as we know, we are talking here both of the scenarios that may unfold and those scenarios that we don't want to unfold. And that's one scenario we should fight against. So we are not just observers of developments, we are also participants in them. And therefore, I don't think it's a lost case as yet. And depends very much on our ability as human beings to galvanize our societies, our governments, to prevent such a disastrous act. Because, as I say, I'm less worried about the official act of annexation. I'm much more worried about the implication for the population, because this will go hand in hand with massive expulsions of people. But of course, the Palestinians are also not passive people. They will resist, and they might get help from other movements in the area, maybe even governments. But in order to make sure that this is not being stopped by bloodshed or turns into bloodshed, of course, we should find, as much as we can, peaceful means of averting such a scenario from unfolding.
I see, Mr. Pape, that this is something that we should take very seriously, especially, as you said, if the right wing is in power and stays in power. At least it is their intention. Mr. Prasad, if you can build on this, and add your views on the likelihood of this scenario.
Well, I mean, firstly, this is a very old scenario. It goes back decades. It's very interesting when Ariel Sharon left his military uniform and joined the government, the Likud government in 1977. The portfolio he took may surprise some of your viewers. You remember him later as the Minister of Defense after 1981. But from 1977 to 1981, Ariel Sharon, the great general, took the agriculture ministry. Because as agriculture minister, he actually put a lot of focus on the illegal settlement building activity in the West Bank. It gets going from 1977. This is a long-term project. It's not like this starts with some settlers coming from the United States in the last 10, 15 years after the Second Intifada. This goes back to 1977, and of course, the roots of it much before that. The reason I'm saying this is that this settlement activity has to be taken extremely seriously, because the settlements are not only about land grabs, they are about changing the consciousness of Israeli society. Israeli society has been put into a trap of having to defend settlers. And this is part of the reason for a rightward shift, not only of people in the settlements, many of whom are actually terrorists, but this has put Israeli society on a rightward drift. And that, to me, is a very dangerous direction, which is provoking annexationist ideas, annexationist ideologies. I mean, here's the scenario I fear, and I agree with Professor Pape. We have to fight against this. I fear an attack on the Dome of the Rock. I fear an attack on Al-Aqsa. I fear that, and that would be catastrophic, because that will mobilize people from around the world in a kind of frenzy which I don't want to see. And this is not I'm not speaking out of turn. There are actually people, elected officials in the Israeli government and parliament, who talk about this. There are US based evangelical preachers who talk about this as if it is a normal thing. Have to get rid of the Dome of the Rock, have to get rid of Al-Aqsa. It's an abomination, very dangerous attitude. And we must be resolute. We must fight against this. There are no half annexations, half measures. And the reason I put it with Ariel Sharon, it's not just about the land, it's about the culture. Israeli society needs to confront the terrible haunting of its own existence around this idea of Eretz Israel and wiping out the Palestinians. Israeli society is haunted by this. It has to deal with this ghost. This is not a Palestinian problem. This is an Israeli problem. And Israelis need to take this very seriously, because it is iron in the soul of the project, not only of Zionism, which has its problems, but of everyday Israeli life that is getting corrupted by this. And I would say to my Israeli friends, wake up. It's already a little too late, but you still have time to wake up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prashad. I see clearly that this scenario is very concerning to both of you, and I completely agree. I will continue with you, Mr. Prashad, on the third scenario, which I think it's coming up more and more in the opinions of geopoliticians, which is about disappearance of the Israel as it exists actually as a state, whereby I would like to hear from you the possible factors that can lead to that. Are they entrancing to the Israeli state entity society, or will this happen because of global pressure or the war itself and so on? So what do you think about the possibility of seeing Israel disappearing?
I mean, look, frankly, this is not I know that a lot of people who are political scientists and so on think that the one state solution, that is to say, Israel as an apartheid state disappears and you have a state which is secular and democratic, where everybody has rights. I mean, there's no doubt that as an abstraction, this is the ideal scenario as an abstraction. The problem is that this requires an immense social and cultural change where people begin to trust each other, where they begin to see each other as equals. Let's take the case of Algeria. After the Algerian war ended, it was very difficult to imagine the Pied Noir remaining in Algeria in large numbers. Very difficult for people who had seen themselves as superior to the Algerians to remain on an equal footing. This requires, sorry, a massive cultural change. In India, very few British people remained, most left. In South Africa, there was a possibility of a certain kind of reconciliation, but it hasn't gone very far. You know, in society, in culture, racism exists, hierarchies exist, property is unevenly distributed, and so on. So, this is the ideal abstract solution, a one state solution. Absolutely. But to get there is not just about bringing the political factions to the table, which is hard enough. That's hard enough. I cannot imagine a scenario where the Israeli right wing is going to be, it will accept the Palestinian factions when they don't even accept the Israeli Arab political parties within the Israeli political establishment. The political level is hard enough. Socially, culturally, it's going to be a really hard struggle. And indeed, the word struggle is one I want to use, because to change cultures of hierarchy, to change entrenched views of oneself as superior to others, very hard to move that. So, yes, we have to try to get there, but we should not exaggerate the ease of transfer from an apartheid situation to a post apartheid secular and democratic society.
But Vijay, before I go to Ilan, what about this happening under internal intrinsic pressures from the Israeli society itself? We see a lot of Israelis, for example, leaving the country.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but I think, even within Israel, and Professor Pape will have more on this than I, but even within Israel, the liberal bloc, let's say, the bloc that would be the natural ally of something like a one-state solution, has put itself periodically on mute. Very difficult to come out there and talk against the sort of ultra right-wing Zionist consensus. I mean, during this particular genocidal campaign, the main criticism of Mr. Netanyahu is that he mishandled the war, or he mishandled the hostage situation. Not that this is an outrageous situation. Like, why have this situation? 2019, when the March of Return took place, why did Israeli snipers kill, innocent and peaceful Palestinians? Why did that happen? That embittered people in Gaza. They said, look, we tried a nonviolent protest. You shot at us. So liberal Israeli society goes on mute every once in a while, feels embattled, feels exasperated. They can't move an agenda. So I think this idea of people moving, yes, it's true. But by the way, there's no real net loss of population, because people are also moving in. And I think the character of the society could change quite dramatically, and not for the better. It's going to take a big struggle to change Israeli society. And that's actually the main stumbling block, in my opinion, to a one-state solution.
Thank you. Very clear, Mr. Prasad. Mr. Pape, please go ahead on the same scenario.
Yes, maybe from a little bit different angle. I think that we are witnessing, not because we want or we don't want it, I don't think it matters. We are witnessing the beginning of the end of Israel. And this is nothing to do with people's wishes. I think there is inherent problems with the Zionist project, by the way, not all of them connected to the Palestinians, that are imploding it from within. I would briefly mention a few of the things that are happening. If you want, these are cracks in the building. And I always say that the Hamas attack on the 7th of October was a bit like a quake, like an earthquake that shattered a building that was already full of cracks in the foundation and extended these cracks to such an extent that I think it is in danger of falling. And a collapse of a state, especially in the region where Palestine is located, is nothing new. Syria is collapsing in front of our eyes. Lebanon is very near to disintegration. Libya, your neighbor, is hardly a state anymore. And so is the case in Yemen. And Iraq itself finds it very difficult to hold its various provinces together as a modern nation state. So it's not unlikely that a state disintegrates or collapses, or a settler colonial project like Zionism comes to an end. But as I stress, this is the beginning of the end of the project, which means it can take a while before it happens. And in fact, because I do believe, unfortunately, that the right wing will prevail in Israel and will annex and would ethnically cleanse and would harass and oppress the Palestinians, this would contribute to the collapse of the state of Israel. There is already an internal implosion between the secular and the non-secular, the religious sections of Judaism in Israel. It seems they have nothing in common. Even the threat of the Hamas or the threat of a war from Hezbollah doesn't provide them a common basis. They are fighting on the streets as we talk today. They're fighting in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, fighting each other. Not a real civil war yet. It's kind of a cold civil war, but it will become worse in the future. It seems that the idea that you can define Judaism as nationalism is not working. It's just not working. So that's one indicator, this implosion from within. And I think what is important about the people who left Israel since the 7th of October, according to informal statistic, more than 500,000, that they are part of the financial elite of Israel. Israel is losing its financial elite. The people who pay 80% of the taxes have already relocated their capital out of the country, and they might follow the money and go out themselves. So there's a huge social implosion that has financial implications together, and that's another indicator for a collapse. The economic crisis that was fully exposed in the 7th of October. Israel was a paragon country of the OECD until the 7th of October. Now, in order to maintain its war efforts in Gaza and in the north, and none of the Israeli leaders I've heard thinks that there is going to be an end to the war in the next 20 to 50 years in their eyes. So Israel would be in a perpetual situation of war. They don't have the economic resources to maintain it without huge financial aid from the United States. They already are getting $14 billion in order to sustain them. But this is a drop in the sea of the money that they need. And even if Trump comes to power in America, I'm not sure he's interested in investing that much money in Israel. He's quite an isolationist. And Biden would have his own problems of sustaining Israel economically to such a level. So this is another indicator, the economic a crisis that they don't know how to solve. Thirdly, there is the army that failed to defend its citizens. It's not performing particularly impressively against a very small guerrilla force in the Gaza Strip. Everybody dreads what would have happened if Hezbollah would have joined Hamas in a joint attack. I mean, you would hope that the Israelis would understand the limits of power because of that. That may come, but doesn't seem to happen as yet. So it's not even only the objective decrease in the invincibility of the Israeli army or its capacity. It's the perception of the society, the Jewish society itself, about the army as being unable to do the job that they always relied upon it to do. I could add to this the growing isolation of Israel in the world. It's not anymore small sections of the global civil society. This is now widespread. And I think the international tribunals, the ICJ and ICC, contributed to this idea that this is now moving from politics from below to politics from above. We already have countries in the global south that have imposed certain sanctions on Israel, like Colombia and Turkey. And this, I don't think, will stop there. So isolation is another crack that is widening since the 7th of October. And I would add to this also the fact that so many young Jews around the world don't see themselves anymore as Zionists. But not only they don't see themselves as Zionists, they think that they should replace their Zionism with active solidarity with the Palestinians. So this is a huge factor. Israel, without the support of global Jewish communities, is very, very vulnerable. And finally, and with this I would end, it's true that at the moment the Palestinian national movement is in disarray and is not able to offer much in terms of vision and strategy. But the younger Palestinian generation is far more united and consensual and active. And this is more hope than analysis, I have to admit. I do hope that they will have the ability to fill the void that the collapse will leave, because a collapse does not necessarily lead to a better regime or better reality. It can also be a long, chaotic period. Much depends on the Palestinian liberation movement ability to unite, to be consensual, democratic, authentic, and offer a vision of equality for everyone who lives today between the river and the sea, and for the many Palestinian refugees who probably would like to go back home once it's possible to create a different kind of a political entity in historical Palestine.
Thank you, Ilan. And I can add, I think the recent overwhelming vote in favor of the recognition of Palestine, and the few countries taking the decision to do it on their own, Spain and Ireland and Norway for that matter. I continue with you, Ilan, but throughout the three scenarios, it's very clear that the situation is very complex. We knew that, and you are confirming it, both you and Parashat today. So, and because of this complexity, a fourth scenario that we cannot avoid to discuss is the escalation of the current conflict to a global conflict and maybe a world war. How do you see that, Ilan?
Yes, definitely there is an acute danger of the present war on Gaza and the kind of low intensity war between Israel and Hezbollah in the north, escalating first of all to a regional war before it becomes a global war. We already saw the involvement of Iran in the conflict that has unfolded since the 7th of October. I think that the plans of Israel, which are acute and are there, to try and solve in a military way the situation in the north by pushing by force the Hezbollah to the river, to the north of the river Litani, creating kind of a buffer zone in the south of Lebanon, is an operation that could easily drag both Iran and the United States into the cycle of war, which is a frightening scenario, because if the US is dragged into it and Iran is dragged into it, there's a domino effect and kind of other, or rather this kind of drags other regional and international forces into such a war. So there is an acute danger. The problem I see, and I don't know what Jai thinks about it, I think the problem is that in security establishments in the global north, but maybe also in India, there is this acceptance of the Israeli narrative that the problem in the region is Iran. Iran, with its kind of octopus, hands, getting everywhere, destabilizing the region, with its wish to impose a Shiite revolution all over the Arab world, and therefore, if we are escalating into regional war, it is the war between the forces of evil and the forces of good. The forces of evil being this excess of power that America has kind of drawn. Russia, maybe China, definitely North Korea, and Iran. Iran and its
And a little bit Algeria. And a little
maybe
bit
Algeria, a
Algeria.
little bit Algeria as well, and the rest are the axis of good against the axis of evil, and the axis of good, surprisingly, has Israel in it. This whole scenario and this whole kind of drawing of axis is totally wrong, totally devoid of any nuances, of the complexities that the area has. Does not take into account the colonial legacy, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean, the fact that the West has imposed nation state on the Eastern Mediterranean that are not working, and they will anyway have to find a different political structure than the Westphalian European nation state, and so on. Iran, of course, has a problem with human rights. I'm not at all denying it, and it would have been a far more effective regional power had it dealt more courageously with its own violation of human and civil rights. But it is an important, you cannot have a reconciliation, you cannot have pacification of the region without Iran. You cannot exclude it. You need it to be part, historically, and from ancient history until today, you needed Iran as part of the future. And therefore, I think that if we can liberate ourselves from these narratives of the axis of evil against the axis of good, or that everything is devised from Tehran in an aggression that is infused by Shiite theology, which is all nonsense to my mind, I think that maybe there we can have a more effective way, first of all, de-escalating the situation before hopefully moving to even more substantial solutions in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Ilan, for bringing up this point regarding the evilization of Iran in the region. For that matter, we are hearing the same narrative through the Moroccan government since they have normalized with Israel, and pointing out that Algeria has particular good relationship with Iran, which is kind of wrong for that matter. So thank you for bringing that point. So Parashad, if you can opine also on this scenario about an escalation to a global conflict, please.
Well, the only country that seems to want a global conflict is the United States. The United States is pursuing a suicidal policy in Ukraine, where now they are saying NATO weaponry can be used to hit ICBM warning centers inside Russian territory. Russia has not used ICBMs in Ukraine. It's an unnecessary provocation. The United States is poking at China in the South China Sea, violating international law in doing so. 75% of world military spending, that share is by NATO countries. They are responsible for 75% of world military spending. China, 10%, Russia, 3%. The Arab world, almost minimal except Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's a ridiculous scenario to start a conversation and not recognize that, if you don't mind me being quite blunt, that the greatest terrorist country on the earth right now is the United States government. Full stop. That's how we have to begin this conversation. The Chinese, for instance, are uninterested in war. The Chinese are the only ones who are seeking a grand bargain between Iran and Saudi Arabia. As Professor Pape said, de-escalating. They held that meeting in Beijing with the high representatives of the Iranians and the Saudis. They created a table to start a conversation with other Arab countries. I was at a meeting in China, where the issue was raised about what is the situation of Arab politics today. And I think that's actually a good question for Arab countries to raise. Major protests in Western countries on behalf of Palestine. Why has Egypt been so silent? In Jordan, at the beginning of the conflict, mass demonstrations. The Queen of Jordan gave 2 interviews to Christian Amanpour. She spoke for the Palestinians. Where is Jordan? Why haven't Jordan and Egypt threatened to tear up their own normalization as a consequence of this genocidal action? It's not enough for the Egyptians to say, well, we support the South African claim. Where is Egypt? Egypt used to be a brave, noble country, leader of the Arabs. Where is Egypt? Nowhere. Mr. Sisi has put Egyptians to sleep. In Jordan, half the population Palestinian. Where is the king? He is barely saying anything. Still trying to, in fact, shoot down missiles fired by the Yemenis. Yemen is taking a leadership in this, at least trying to stand up as an Arab nation. Okay, Algeria also, as far as defending the South African position at the ICJ, Algeria also opposing Morocco's annexation of the Sahrawi people. All of that is fine, but it's not enough. So, there are forces in the world that want to dial down the tension. For instance, as I said, the Chinese government trying to host the grand bargain between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But look at the way it works, my friends. The global media, the money media, portrays China as a threat, portrays Russia as a threat, portrays Iran as a threat. But the biggest threat of them all, which has 900 military bases around the world, which is trying to seduce us with its weaponry, the biggest threat in the world is not treated as a threat. The biggest threat in the world, the United States can still pretend to be an honest broker between the Palestinians and the Israelis. They should be laughed out of the room. They are the enablers of this war. They are arming the Israeli government. They are giving them intelligence and so on. When we talk about the potential of this becoming a global war, it already is, because the United States is involved and is trying to, in a sense, drag in others. The fact that the Israelis could go and bomb an Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria and get away with it. The Iranian response was not comparable. What Iran could have done, for instance, was attack an Israeli consular office somewhere. They didn't do that. They fired a bunch of, it was like a big fireworks display, to be honest with you. It was a big drama. There was no commensurate attack at an Israeli diplomatic facility, which would have escalated things out of control. The Iranians don't want a war. The Chinese don't want a war. And even though the Russians did invade Ukraine, they don't want a war. It's the United States in decline that is like an angry and tired animal with a thorn in its side, trying desperately to use militarism to maintain authority. We have to be very clear about this. They are a dangerous country. They are not to be trusted to be brokers of anything, least of all the question of Israel and Palestine.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think your views are very valued. I really appreciate the discussion. We have spent now 53 minutes. Let's have a look to what I call the wisdom of the crowd. Though the crowd that follows Jazair Hope is skewed clearly towards Palestine, as you can guess. So close to 300 votes, 298. The 4 scenarios. So the first one, a two-state solution, got 19%. Annexation of Palestine by Israel got 2%. Escalation to a global war, 13%. And the end of Israel, as it exists actually, 68%. I don't know if this is a wishful thinking or it represents the likelihood of those scenarios. So, Ilan, if you want to start to opine on this.
Yes, I think you're right. It's difficult to see from the results whether people are telling us what they think is going to happen or what they would have liked. But because it's a meeting of hope, and probably these are my final words, because before VJ will probably find even a better way of doing it. I do think it's important to be careful with this word in Arabic, nihaya, or the end. It sounds very destructive. I'm an Israeli Jew. I'm not looking for destruction, and I'm not looking for for the killing. Or there are 8 million Jews in Palestine. You don't end them as such. I know people don't mean this. I'm sure that, and I think that we are fighting very hard to explain, especially in the West, that the slogan.
Ilan, let me interrupt you just to explain technical point here. YouTube, when you do polls, it does not allow you to use more than 65 characters. So, and
Okay,
I wanted
no. I'm not blaming anyone.
to
I'm just using it to
yeah,
explain that, because I think it's
yeah,
very important, because I'm a great believer in the slogan Palestine should be free from the
yeah,
river to the sea. I don't only have to explain it to Palestinians, I have to explain it to Israelis as well. And I think that this is what we mean is nobody can end the state. That's why I said states collapse. People cannot end the state. That's
yeah,
doesn't even grammatically in English, it doesn't work. It's not a logical sentence. You don't end the state. States collapse and disintegrate. What you can end is a regime. You can change a regime. And when we talk about it, and I hope and I think that's what the 66% are thinking about, and I share their aspiration. We want an end to an apartheid. We want an end to colonization, an end to genocide. And the only way of ending it is a change of regime in historical Palestine. Zionism, that may have started as a noble idea of fighting anti-Semitism, and there was anti-Semitism in Europe, turned into a settler colonial ideology that believes in the elimination of the Palestinians. We have to get rid of this ideology. And without that ideology, we can build something much better, based on equality, based on recognition of what has been done to the indigenous people, by allowing the return of the refugees, by bringing back Palestine to the Arab world, to the Muslim world where it belongs. And all these reconciliation and restorative justice processes are very important, and they are included in this word that can sound alarming to some people, but it's not. It's an end of something bad in the hope of building something new. And I think this is very important for all of us to explain and fight for, and this will give it a chance for happening, if not tomorrow or the day after, at least in the medium or long run. We need to give people hope that this is a possible way of living together, as Jews, Muslim, and Christian lived in Palestine together until 1948. There's no reason they should not be able to do it again in the future.
very clear, Ilan. Thank you very much. So, Prasad, please go ahead. Your views on what the crowd thinks.
Well, first, Professor Pape said it very well. We are all people who come from very old civilizations. I was born in Calcutta, in West Bengal, in India, a very old city. Even though the British claim to have built it only 380 some years ago, it's an old city. Why? Because it had populations from our trading. Over hundreds and thousands of years. There were Armenians. There were Baghdadi Jews, the Vidal Sassoon family of Baghdad. Some went to Paris and became fancy fashion designers. The rest came to Calcutta and became traders in the marketplace. I come from a city with rich, confusing, convivial, hostile, normal human relations. That's what we are like. Our problem is that imposed on us were some ideas that were quite ruthless and nasty, including, of course, the idea that somehow we were or in the sense of Palestine, Palestine would be the dumping ground for European anti-Semitism. Rather than Europe dealing with its anti-Semitism, it outsourced its anti-Semitism to Palestine, where already Jews, Christians, Armenians, all kinds of people live close together. Europe has to deal with its anti-Semitism. Europe was the originator of anti-Semitism, and now, embarrassed by its anti-Semitism, it is calling us anti-Semitic, bizarrely. There was no anti-Semitism in Asia that is in any record. There were some incidences here and there. Of course, there are incidences, because people both live with each other in a good way and in a bad way. You some days like your neighbor, the other days you want them to disappear somewhere else. That's a natural way in which humans live. We need to find a way to live as people, to start loving each other as people. But my God, the journey is far. There's a great poet from near where my family comes who said 250 years ago, आदमी था बड़ी मुश्किल से इंसान हुआ. आदमी था बड़ी मुश्किल से इंसान हुआ. We were people with great difficulty. We became human. Great difficulty, struggle, great difficulty.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was really a pleasure to have you. It was very insightful. I hope you also liked it, and I extend another hope that I can get you another time, sometime in the future, for another subject. But it was really a pleasure.
For me, it was a special pleasure. It's my first time with Professor Pape, whom I admire greatly. So really, it was wonderful. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to be together.
Thank you. I echo this. Indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm very happy also that I have been the reason for this gathering. I wish you a great day ahead. Thank you again very much for our followers. Thank you very much for your support, for your liking, for your sharing of this emission, for the insightful comments, also for answering the poll. And again, I wish you Eid Mubarak. For those who do not master really English, as soon as the YouTube emission is finished, you can put the subtitles either in Arabic or in French. Donc, pour ceux qui ne maîtrisent pas l'anglais, ils peuvent mettre les sous-titres en arabe ou en français juste après l'émission. I tell you, see you soon in another subject with other guests. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much.
Shukran jazilan.
Shukran. Assalamu.
Bye.
حبك حكاية يا للناس، انت رواية كلك إحساس. حبك حكاية يا للناس، انت رواية كلك إحساس. انت رواية، حبك حكاية، انت رواية، حبك حكاية. مدة وسنين كلك حنين، أنا وياك عشناها الاثنين. مدة وسنين كلك حنين، أنا وياك عشناها الاثنين. رواية، حبك حكاية، أنت رواية، حبك حكاية، أنت رواية. كيفاش ننساك يا ابن البشر. انتي القمر في ليلة السمر، كيفاش ننساك يا ابن البشر. انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية، انتي رواية حبك حكاية. la 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 la